So moving on to our topic discussion today, it's about artificial intelligence and the role that Islamic law might play in this particular realm. It's something that's developing, and the question comes, well, why does Islam, or what role does Islam and Islamic law have in all of this? For me personally, those who don't know what artificial intelligence really means, it's basically utilization of data to make decisions that humans would normally make. Mm-hmm. And that is actually, for example, things like driving and making a decision when to turn or how to avoid collisions, etc., etc. Over time that happens. Now, if you would kind of give your perspective as to the issues that arise when you think of artificial intelligence, I would love to hear that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Most Merciful. First of all, I want to say that let's get something out the way, and it's something that people may have certain doubts on. Islam propagates that all knowledge disseminates from God. It comes from Allah. Allah is the source of all knowledge. And therefore, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran says, "Allama al-insan." He is the teacher of insan. "Allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam." That which he does not know. So we find that within the course of history, since the beginning of Islam and until today, technology has advanced in unprecedented ways, and with AI, it's no exception. Let me give you a couple of examples. They say that when TVs were introduced, many of the scholars thought that there was a jinn inside that box, that TV box. Remember how TVs were like a big box, right? And then they kind of evolved and said, okay, well, it took a long time. I don't want to talk about the history of Islam and TVs, but it took a long time for scholars, whether Sunni scholars or Shia scholars, to come to an understanding and accept this new reality, this new normal with where people are. Same goes with radios. For a long time, buying a radio in some of the holy lands, so if you tell us how it is that AI is going to serve your field, how is it going to make things easier for you? How is it going to make things easier for physicians and hospitals and medical researchers? What I want to say is it should do the same for the religious circle.
I think there's an assumption here that this is going to make it easier, and I would be a little more cautious about that, because it's going to make our lives equally easy and difficult because of this new technology, as all other tools tend to do anyway, right? Anything you can think of, used for good, used for bad. Well, this is no different. So as a doctor, perhaps I can utilize the data to deliver better treatments, to know what works, what doesn't, because any one doctor has only the experience of a handful of his patients. They can say, well, I always do this and it works right. But if you look at the whole community of physicians doing the same thing, it may not be panning out quite right. It may be a bias. So perhaps it'll help me make better decisions. On the other hand, the issue is that it's not necessarily helping me make decisions. The idea is it's making the decisions automatically and pushing it into an algorithm. And that worries me a little bit. That's number one. We talked about an example of that, right? If you think about it, that if you, let's say, if you let a computer make a decision, or an AI model make a decision about who gets a ventilator when they're deathly ill, and you say, well, there's an 18-year-old and 80-year-old, all other things being equal, who should get it? Well, it would be reasonable, many doctors would say, well, if all other equal, give it to the 18-year-old because of the number of years of life potentially saved, right? Okay, Well, now you put that teaching aspect of that. Well, look for a greater number of lives saved, or life years saved, right? Well, now you get another scenario where you get two individuals exactly the same age, 35 years old, all else being equal, except their race. One is white, one is black. And if you let the algorithm run based on that, it may give us answers we're very uncomfortable with. For example, it'll say, well, COVID tends to affect blacks a lot worse and actually makes them sicker and higher mortality compared to the white. So should you automatically just keep the ventilators for the white? These are very, very uncomfortable questions. And they're no less uncomfortable when we have to deal with it ourselves. But suddenly it's a computer that's doing this for you makes me quite cautious.
I understand where you're coming from. Let me pose a couple of scenarios of how I understand AI is going to revolutionize different fields of working environments. There are statistics that by 2070, and this is, I believe, done by Oxford and Cambridge and very prestigious universities, that, for example, veterinarians will 90% of their work will be done by the computer. Same thing goes for physicians. Diagnosing an illness will be much easier. Now, but I want to kind of focus on a particular field. Let's kind of zoom in and say, you're getting married to somebody, okay, and you give them your DNA and your potential wife's DNA. Now, with artificial intelligence, they'll be able to tell you a lot about your children, whether they're going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, whether they're going to be more likely to be obese, more likely to be very smart, how tall will they be, what is their skin color, what is their eye color, and so on and so forth. This in itself then can allow you to plug in the knowledge that you have, and that's the aspect they're working on now. The first, as I explained it, is already being done, is how then I can, before this child is born, can kind of make sure that they don't, we can change the laziness and the weight and the height and all that, the tendencies that may come with those two individuals who are getting married. This in itself will revolutionize, the way that we create families. And of course, I believe in the religion of Islam. Islam is not against, perfecting situations for yourself to have more, to have, for example, better kind of offsprings. Now, this is one scenario. How do we do this? How do we take this model? Because this is as advanced, at least from my understanding, as AI has gotten within the medical field. Now that's one picture of hundreds of different pictures. How do we take this and bring it to religion and say, there's something that's revolutionizing the medical field? I met with a friend of mine, our mutual friend, last week. And he said he looks at data from dentistry schools. They could be hundreds of thousands, I don't even know. He didn't give me a number, but imagine if every dentist in the United States is kind of plugging in some sort of data, right? Now what he does is he comes and he looks at all this data, not for a day or two or a month, but he looks at it for, let's say, 5 years, right? They examine this very thoroughly, and they come back to you and they say, you as a dentist should no longer be prescribing this particular medication. Why? Especially to people between the age 70 and 80, because of those results. So you look at the results, it's, speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we have such data available that's revolutionizing the healthcare, in terms of creating families and children, in terms of looking at data and trying to eliminate certain decisions and perfect certain decisions. What we're trying to look at here is how can we apply that to religion? How can we make it as accessible, as relevant, as of service to religion?
If I may, I don't necessarily think that data, but there's a couple of things.
Sure.
I speak only for the medical part of it, right? When it comes to putting together data and doing this is kind of what the research is. I think the AI aspect of it is where it automatically makes some decisions for you, and that piece is where it gets dicey. But data, that's great. Having more data to make decisions and seeing that it pan out, that's a prospective or retrospective clinical trial. But let me also warn you that more data is not always good. And you may say, how could that possibly be? Well, let's say at a previous time, we did not know what gender your unborn child was,
Okay.
or what chromosomal structure your unborn child had, or what facial or spinal anomalies your child. Now with all this data, now it begs the question of picking and choosing the characteristics that you and your spouse want. And that means abortion, that means some very, very difficult decisions. So just, data is one thing. If it was AI, it would be like making that decision that, because that is that, you therefore must abort. Having it make that decision for you, as what you human would go through the process,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
is where it becomes really dangerous, potentially.
Okay, we're very far away from, let's say there's a pregnant woman that shows up at a hospital and she has this child with a bunch of dysformalities and diseases and what have you, and the AI just aborts the child.
Right.
But it's
an example. It's an extended example.
But let me kind of turn the table here and say, hypothetically, you're a doctor in some very remote village, okay, in America, okay? Because I know some doctors have actually told me that they've done their residency in very small towns where they were the only physicians, right? Now this could be not the case now.
No, it still is.
Okay,
It's
still
plenty of rural areas.
Let's say 5,000, 10,000 people, whatever, and you're the only doctor there. Now, a Muslim woman comes to you and she says, I need to get my medical examination, my physical, whatever. If we have data that tells us by that female, by you as a Muslim doctor or a female Muslim, refraining from seeing a male doctor in that particular city, death rates go up. Maybe cancer is now more prevalent within our community, diabetes is more prevalent in our community, or whatever disease. I mean, I'm not an expert in those names, I'm sure you are. Now this data is given to a scholar. And the scholar says, well, at this stage, I permit the Muslim doctor to do the examination for Muslim women, and I also permit Muslim women to go and get checked with a male doctor. Why do I say this? It's because once I have two equally capable physicians, I should be going to a male doctor, right? And my wife should be going to a female doctor. Giving birth, for example. You have two capable physicians, and I don't know, I could be wrong, but I think once you told me that it is in some cases proven that female doctors are
actually. That's right. What you're referring to is actually interesting. That they tried to figure out, well, what makes a really smart doctor? What in terms of good outcomes in the emergency room specifically, and that's what I am, right? Emergency room doctor. So we said, all right, so I'm looking at whether they went to Ivy League or whether they went to had certain characteristics. The only thing that panned out was that if you were a female, you were likely to have, if you had a female doctor, you had a likely have much better outcome for your patients.
Okay.
Why is it? I don't know. Some people suspect that women won't jump to the more aggressive interventions as quickly. We'll try and be more patient. Perhaps there's a lot of theories behind that. But yes,
So
I agree.
anyway, so basically, without that data, a religious authority, whether it's a marja or a council, whatever it may be, cannot make such a decision that, now it is, with all this data, let's say with all this data available, hypothetically, you have prostate cancer. If we collect data from all men who are in the age of where they're suspected to have prostate cancer, or they do have prostate cancer, hypothetically, okay? It's very far-fetched. And the data shows that female doctors can basically treat prostate cancer, and this is global data, right, for 5 years, prostate cancer better than male doctors, then the religious verdict has to shift and say, no, you no longer now. So that's
what you're saying then is that you can take the AI development, both data collecting as well as algorithm and putting together, and really utilize it in how the leaders advise the followers in the religious realm. That's kind of where we're heading to.
Yes.
Which brings the other question: is that can an AI then replace a Maharaja, for example? Does that even come remotely
Yeah, obviously,
realm of possibility?
We don't mean this in a disrespectful way. I'm sure we don't.
I don't mean it in that way. I'm sort of
you're thinking
understanding how that whole process works.
Absolutely. And there was a time when this discussion was being held and saying, can women even become mujtahids? This really was a legitimate discussion people had. So now we're past that. Obviously, we know that women, in their essence, have the power and ability to become fuqaha and mujtahids and derive Islamic law just like a man can. Then the discussion came, well, can they be judges? Then the discussion came, can they be maraja? Yet we still have a variety of opinions on this. But you're right in bringing up this question in terms of the future. Today, this sounds very strange, but 5, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, there could be a possibility of that happening. Not per se a marja, but it could make decision-making for maraja or a council of mujtahids much easier and simpler. I'll give you an example. I mean, this has already occurred. We have traditions, we have hadiths that say, begin your food with salt and end your food with salt, right? So, now, you're a doctor. What do you think? Should I begin my food with salt and end my food with salt?
Absolutely not.
Okay. What damage could that do to me?
The worst is, in today's world, is the excessive salt leading to high blood pressure and heart disease.
Okay. Now, imagine you have three meals a day, and you're taking a good number of salt 6 times a day because it's before and after. Obviously, you're damaging your body, right? Another is drinking water. As a physician, is drinking water good for you or is it bad for you?
Drinking water is good for you.
Very good. But let's look at traditions. We have 2 traditions. One that says start with salt and end with salt, and you're saying that's bad for you. And one says do not drink a lot of water because that's bad for you, but you're saying drinking water is good for you. And this is proven, right? Okay, so is Islam against science? Is it against medicine? Is it out of date? Absolutely not. We come and look at the circumstance in which the Imam told people not to drink a lot of water. And then you tell me if he was giving the right advice or the wrong advice. If you have to leave the bathroom at 2 a.m., walk 20 minutes until you get to a bathroom, how likely is it that you're going to end up going to a bathroom? Not likely, especially if you're a woman. So you're going to hold it in from dark when it gets dark. Like for example, right now it gets dark around 8.
Very late, yeah.
And it gets lit around 7, right? So imagine you end up not going to the bathroom from 8 a.m. to 7 a.m., 8 p.m. to 7 a.m., 11 hours you're holding it in.
Right.
In that case, what's advice? What advice would you give? Would you give...
Limit your fluids.
Exactly, limit your fluids, because the damage could be worse.
And
right?
if you have somebody sweating it out in the desert, losing all your electrolytes, it makes absolute sense to have that extra salt.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So now let's come to not even, 1400.
And for that matter, by the way, dates.
Yes.
We're this
But
may
just
be sacrilegious.
I think it's not as clear as far as the salt one.
No, but there is
So
something to be considered.
we need to clarify what the salt issue is. The salt issue is 1400 years ago, not even 1400 years ago, 400 years ago, people were galloping on their horses and trotting and sweating in the desert. So then you explain to us what that means and why you need salt.
You're gonna lose your electrolytes, and if you're just replacing it with water, which most people just do, without anything else in it, you're going to dilute out. Your sodium is going to get lost. You'll get muscle cramps. You'll get confusion. You'll end up in a shock.
Okay, so before we move on to whatever you wanted to move on, now what the idea is that science data helped us change our fatwas. So today the scholars are not telling you to not drink a lot, because today you get up from your bed and you go to the bathroom. So things have changed, times have changed, data tells us that we can change the Islamic verdict. Now if you went to Hajj and there was no bathrooms and whatever, obviously I always hear now doctors telling people limit your consumption of food and drinking and whatever, because access to the bathroom is very difficult.
The thing, since you mentioned it, the whole idea with the dates is that there is such a high amount of diabetes and obesity within most Western communities that it makes sense not to have excess in dates and things like that, or for that matter, any other concentrated sweets when you have a tendency to go down that path. This specifically applies, I'm really talking about diabetics, who kind of say, well, this is perfectly good. Now, for most other people who depleted calories, it certainly makes sense. But it's to be reconsidered, and we thought that it's for specific populations. So, interesting conversation. We've got a few minutes.
I want to bring up something that could be interesting. There will be a time, and I don't know how is it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that people will not get married based on their parents or even themselves making a decision for them.
Like that hasn't happened already.
No, I mean, you're not the one making the decision.
Oh, and
You're
AI.
your parents. Exactly.
Oh, that's
AI will make the decision.
I'd rather have my parents make the decision than some AI computer make the
No, let's
decision.
listen.
Oh
This is
my
how they
gosh.
pitch it. They say that...
It's like a dating site tagline. We'll match you up.
I don't think so. Just hear me out on this. So this is how they describe it. They say, since you're born, not me and you, but our children, since they were born, everything they did is basically logged online. Every website, every email, every music, everywhere they have gone, what they enjoy, what they dislike. So the internet knows them better than they know themselves. Better than me and you know our children, right? The internet knows them very well. It also knows this other young woman who it's kept, she's now 18, 20 years old, 25 years old. Now AI comes and says, Hasan, get to know Mario. And you're just like, no, there's no way. And it's telling you, no, give it a shot. So you give it a shot and you're like, wow, this is, and I'll give you an example. It's like, we tried to make it to a iftar dinner after the show, and Waze tells us, make a right. And you're like, I live here. I'm not going to make a right. I'm going to make a left. You make a left and there's something, right?
Yeah.
And you don't make it to your iftar and you're hungry. And next time when Waze or maps or whatever tells you make a left, you make sure you make a left, right? Right? So imagine if there is going to be hundreds of thousands of marriages based on AI that are successful. That you're going like, oh my God, like,
All right.
how is that bad?
How is that bad? You know why?
Islamically.
Because it's very simple. It's when the AI starts pulling out people of different religions and stuff for you to go date, because the chances of you actually going through a successful marriage will be a lot higher if you go ignore the religion issue. Suddenly, think about it.
I wonder if it would do that. I wonder if it would do that.
I think it would.
Because I don't think so. Because part of our comfort, part of compatibility, I'll actually go as far as saying this. It will probably suggest the same person, same religion, same school of thought. I don't know about the same background, depending on how it is. Do you want traditional? Do you want somebody who's koja like yourself? Or do you want somebody who, no, you don't mind? That depends on you, but algorithm knows that about you. The computer knows that. Anyways, it's an interesting thing. Now the question that arises for the future ulama, for our maraja, when a millennial, I gave a speech last year in Muharram called When a Millennial Becomes a Marja. It's going to be a completely different form of giving fatwas. Really, I mean, imagine...
They're going to be doing it from the parents' home.
Imagine today, you have...
all the stereotypes we have of the millennials.
No, but the concept is when millennials or Gen Zs become maraja, there's going to be major decision making in terms of gender, For example, I'll be very quick, I know we're kind of running out of time. Let's say somebody changed their gender, right? And this is happening every day. We hear about this every day. Change their gender. Now, do you let them into the women's section, men's section? You're a scholar, they come to you and say, marry me. I used to be a man, now I'm a woman. What do you do? All those questions. Where do you bury them? Do you bury them as men? Do you bury them as women? Their inheritance. That is going to be actually the marja'iyya millennial Gen Zs having to make such decisions, having to make decisions on AI. Let's say I want to make an app that's going to make it easier for kids to get married and to meet. Can I spy on them? Is this spying moral? Is it immoral? Where do I draw the line? I think, I'm glad this conversation started, but it's certainly the tip of the iceberg, because you can imagine, do we have questions that are coming in? Or
But you know what we should do? I think we're almost at the end. Actually, we passed the time.
We have like about 5 minutes that we're supposed to take questions.
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Yeah.
So here's the other part of it. While we're at it,
I do have 2 questions for you though.
For those who are listening, look, this is not a one-sided or 2 people discussion. This is truly a multi-pointed discussion here, and it needs to be that way for us to know what to discuss. We can come in with our biases, our thoughts on what it is, but what it means to you may be very different. And without your input, it will be very difficult for us to be able to incorporate that into the necessary discussions that are going to happen over the next few years. So please join us. Give your opinion through questions, through comments, and call us. Leave us. We'll set up a mechanism by which we can take messages.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people were kind enough to even email us and send us some comments and whatever. We're trying to kind of figure out this technical difficulties. We'll get it done 100% by tomorrow. We've actually been working since 4 a.m. yesterday until literally just before the show, and everything was fine, but again, we had a follow-up. So my question to you before we conclude, according to the data and algorithm and the AI, the best restaurant for iftar in Houston?
That depends on your spice tolerance, which needs to be taken into consideration. And that proves that the AI just is, after all, made by the human and will be deficient in so many ways unexpectedly.
Okay, but you still have to answer my question.
All right. So I think for American food, like burger, steaks, is Niners Grill. That's in Sugarland area. For if you want to get really expensive ones, there's other options. There is a Brazilian steakhouse in Montrose that's outstanding. That would be worth considering. And for Indian food, oh boy, there's so many choices. I'd say Angas is the grill. This is
Yes,
safe
I've heard, yeah. I've heard Agaz is actually better than what you would get in Karachi. I'm not sure how true that is, but I saw a documentary also.
Well, it's much less likely to give you GI issues than Karachi, that's for sure.
I've tried quite, it's been a month, but I've tried quite a number of restaurants, but I certainly do look forward to spending some more time at different restaurants and kind of trying out the different cuisines. There's hundreds of restaurants in Houston. It would take years to kind of cover.
What do your kids like?
I think all different kinds of food.
That they could tolerate spice?
No, unfortunately, only one of them can. I and him actually do have a tolerance for spicy food, but the rest of them don't. But again, I mean, all kids like
Burgers.
the burgers and steak and yeah. So
Now that
if you guys have,
you've got a group of people who are sitting there hungry to begin with, now totally.
But remember, New York is already breaking their fast, so they're enjoying this.
We're making California suffer.
Yes, but we're gonna wrap up. Can you share the email address for people to Houston Islam?
It's info@houstonislam.org. It's at .com, which will also go to preferred as houstonislam.org. info@houstonislam.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hasan.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.